Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Please find a seat. I'm sure there's still people arriving, so we will get started with the prayers. And after that, I'm going to introduce you the topic and get into the topic. And so if you have the folder there, we will first of all do the Manjushri, prayers to Manjushri, page 1. And then followed by the refuge and four immeasurables on page 9. And then after that we will do the Heart Sutra on page 5 and 6 before we begin the teachings. And after those prayers finish, then we will do the text prayers, teachings on the text, and the first 2-page handouts you should have a copy of, so you should have that because we're going to go through this very famous 11th century Indian text, very least known, but nevertheless very important. So let's do the prayers. I pay homage to Guru and Lord Arya Manjushri. Your intelligence shines forth like the sun, unclouded by the two obscurations. You hold the scripture text in your heart, symbolic of the seeing of all things as they are. Those who are caught in the prison of samsara are confused in the darkness of ignorance and overwhelmed by their sufferings. In 60 ways with your speech you teach mighty beings to whom you are compassionate as your only child. Your proclamation of Dharma is like a roaring thunder, which awakens beings from the stupor of delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma. You were the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of ignorance. Primarily, your princely body is the embodiment of perfection of Bodhisattva dwelling on 10th Bhumi. I pay homage to Manjushri, who dispels my ignorance, whose body is adorned with the 412 marks of a Buddha. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and texts that explain them. Omara bhajana de, 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 omara Omara bhajana de, 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 omara bhajana Omara bhajana de, 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 omara Omara bhajana. So now on page 9, we'll renew our refuge. Let's not do these prayers just as some prayer to start things off. They themselves are actually meditational. So on page 9, we'll do the prayers all in English, 3 times each. In Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, I take refuge until I life reach. By the merit of listening to these teachings, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all living beings. In Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, I take refuge until I am reached. By the merit of listening to this teaching, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all living beings. In Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of listening to this teaching, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all living beings. May all living beings have happiness and cause of happiness. May all living beings be free from sorrow and the cause of sorrow. May all living beings be from the bliss that is sorrowless. May all living beings leave attachment and hatred towards near ones afar by living with equanimity. May all living beings have happiness and cause of happiness. May all living beings be free from sorrow and the cause of sorrow. May all living beings be separated from the least that is soulless. May all living beings leave attachment and hatred towards near ones afar by living with equanimity. Now the Heart Sutra on page 5. To the perfection of wisdom, the Blessed Mother, pay homage. Thus I have heard at one time the Blessed One, Bhagavan, was dwelling in Rajgira on Vulture's Peak, together with the assembly of Sangha and great assembly of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in samadhi on the enumeration of the phenomena called profound illumination. Also, at that time, the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, Superior Avalokiteshvara, was contemplating the meaning of the profound perfection of wisdom, and he saw that the five aggregates are also empty of inherent existence. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, Superior Avalokiteshvara: how should a son or daughter of good lineage, who wishes to practice profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, Superior Avalokiteshvara, said this to Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, whatever son or daughter of good lineage practice profound perfection of wisdom should view in this way. They should correctly view those five aggregates also empty of inherent existence. Form is emptiness, emptiness form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition of factors, consciousness are empty. Shariputra, in the same way, all phenomena are merely empty, that is, without characteristic. They are not created, they do not cease, they have no impurity. They are not devoid of impurity, they do not decrease and increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no phenomena. There is no eye element, so forth, up to mind element, also up to element of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance, no exhaustion of ignorance, and so forth, up to no aging and death, no exhaustion of aging and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no cessation, no power, no exalted wisdom, no attainment, also no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because bodhisattvas have no attainment, they depend on and abide in the perfection of wisdom, because their minds are without. They go to the completion nirvana. All the Buddhas who abide in the three times, having relied upon the perfection of wisdom, became manifestly perfect Buddhas in the perfect and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of perfection of wisdom is the mantra of great knowledge, unsurpassed mantra, mantra equal to the unequal, but mantra that thoroughly pacifies all sufferings. Because it is not false, it should be known as the truth. Mantra of perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Tadyada Om Gade Gade Bara Gade Bara Zangade Bodhizo Tadyada Om Gade Gade Bara Bara Zangade Bodhizo Tadyada Gade Bara Gade Bara Zangade Bodhizo Tadyada Gade Bara Gade Bara Zangade Bodhizo Tadyada Gade Bara Gade Bara Zangade Bodhizo Tadyada Gade Gade Bara Gade Bara Zangade Bodhizo Tadyada Gade Bara Gade Bara Zangade Bodhizo Tadyada Gade Gade Bara Gade Bara Zangade Tadyada Barangade Barazangade Bodhizo Tadyada Barangade Barangade Barazangade Gadengade Barangade Barazangade Gadengade Barangade Barazangade Tadyada Barangade Barazangade Bodhizo 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 Tadyada Barangade Barazangade Tadyadam Gadengade Barangade Barazangade Bodhizo Shariputra, Bodhisattva, Mahasattva should train the profound perfection of wisdom in that way. Then the Blessed One arose from the Samadhi, said to Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Superior Avalokiteshvara, well done, well done, well done. One of good lineage, it is just so. One of good lineage, it is like that. Profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught. Even Tathagatas will rejoice in this. The Blessed One having so spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, Superior Avalokiteshvara, and all those gathered there, and those who were gods, humans, and demigods, were filled with admiration and praised the words of the Blessed One. So as I say, welcome to this particular term. We are starting a special text to be able to hopefully cover all within this term. In the past, we have gone through certain texts that has taken more than a couple of terms. But this text length and succinctness of that would probably be right to cover just these 8-week sessions we're going to have. Fully enlightened Buddha taught the texts and teachings after his enlightenment. All the teachings are originally Buddha's realizations. Only by Buddha attaining enlightenment did he then teach the Dharma that he taught. So all the teachings are realization of the Buddha, and these teachings that Buddha gave are orally transmitted for good at least 6 centuries. Until 2nd century AD, all the teachings were oral. And then later, around the 2nd century onwards, a number of the discourses, teachings that has been restored in the memory of very amazing monks who had reached what we call arhathood, who has an art memory of being able to repeat every words that they heard from their teachers, and they from their teachers, and originally from the Buddha. And so that is called the canonical text. You can call it in Buddhism. That's the original words of the Buddha. And so original words of Buddha contain usually in 3 baskets. Tripitaka, we call it. Collection of discipline, collection of discourses, and collection of metaphysic teachings. So these are called Vinaya, Sutra, and Abhidharma. So traditionally, the oldest Buddhist original texts of the Buddha are committed into these Tripitakas. And Tripitaka is mainly emphasized as respectively a remedy to greed, hatred, and ignorance, respectively, by those 3 sets of teachings. Since all sufferings of the world and individuals are only caused by one's own greed, hatred, and ignorance, Buddha gave these teachings to help people to allay their own life and thoughts and feelings and emotions to be transformed by adopting these teachings. But all the texts that Buddha taught were in Sanskrit and in Pali, were translated. But then after, I would say, from early 2nd century onwards, like Nagarjuna and many other earlier Sanghas, they also wrote commentaries. They're called Shastras. These are commentaries. All the commentary literature are mainly Indians. So India those days covered a lot of area. And so therefore this commentary literature to the canonical literatures. Canonical literature are called Kangyur in Tibetan, and commentary literature called Tengyur. Tengyur or commentary literature are written by Indian scholars, panditas, mahasiddhas on those topics, whatever were. So, so this particular text belongs to the latter group. It's thankfully it's included in the Tengyur. Probably this Dharmarakshita, author of this text, came in 11th century. He is reputed to be Indonesian. I don't know whether he was born as Indonesian or Indonesia was known by that name by those days. But the very famous Indian teacher, Atisha, had traveled in search of this teacher, Dharmarakshita, who gave him many teachings. And these teachings are called Lojong. Lojong, mainly training of the good heart. Training of the good heart. It's more inspired by the Mahayana Buddhist text. So this belongs to the commentary literature within the Mahayana Buddhist text. Since Dharmarakshita wrote this text, but his disciple Atisha, who traveled to Tibet in 1043, and then 1042 rather, and then he lived in Tibet without thinking he will. He thought he was going there for a few years and then go back, but he ended up staying there whole life because he was so revered, and he didn't realize how much was he needed in Tibet because so Atisha stayed on. So there is a very legendary story how Atisha traveled so many months on a boat in search of this teacher Dharmarakshita. So only thing we know greatness of Dharmarakshita is only if you read about Atisha. If you read about Atisha, then you know that Atisha traveled in search of this teacher Dharmarakshita who gave him this famous teaching called Lojong. So then, of course, Atisha himself wrote a number of small texts on how to train the good heart. It's mainly to train in the how to conquer one's ego through practicing bodhicitta. So that is mainly the Lojong. Because why we need to train the mind is to train to drop selfishness and adopt selflessness by embracing bodhicitta. So that was the kind of Lojong. And when Atisha came to Tibet in 1043, he was so highly revered, and he found the Tibetans were practicing mixture of pre-Buddhist shamanistic religious practices, as well as quite a lot of Buddhist teachings that has been introduced there as early as 7th century, but then in the middle of early 9th century, Tibetan Buddhism suffered a big setback as persecuted by a pro-shamanist king who sort of persecuted Buddhism and destroyed the monasteries, forced all the monks to disrobe, and then not allowed to practice. So that went on for quite a few decades. So Atisha was invited to Tibet during the second spread of Buddhism, they call second spread of Buddhism in Tibet, to revive Buddhism. So in any way, Atisha found, even though he gave many teachings during those days, he emphasized the idea of practicing bodhicitta, most importantly. He himself did a retreat on bodhicitta in Western Tibet. So just before going to the text, Atisha wrote about this teaching. He says, "When I renounced my kingdom and practiced austerity, I accumulated merit and met with my supreme teacher." So he's referring to Dharmarakshita. "He taught to me this sacred Dharma nectar and initiated me into it. Having mastered the antidotes, today I'm held together still by the Dharma." So he honors, he gives credit to these Lojong teachings that Atisha, who still is in Dharma, was because he can't forget the very sacredness of these teachings. By casting wide my intelligence without any prejudice and without bias with regard to doctrinal affiliation, whenever I study the various teachings, I've witnessed immeasurable wonders. But I found this teaching most beneficial to practice in this degenerate time. So this is what Atisha said when he introduced the Lojong teachings. And there's a whole story about Atisha's journey to Indonesia and great trouble he took to find firstly Dharmarakshita and finally receive the teachings. And when he received the teaching, then he goes to India, and then not soon after that, then he was invited to Tibet. So that's a little background of the Atisha and Dharmarakshita. But Dharmarakshita's story of Dharmarakshita pretty much starts and ends that way. We don't have much about him. It seems to he definitely, if it wasn't an Indian master who went to Indonesia and became teacher there, he definitely would have been an Indonesian who went to study in India and brought back the teachings. But somehow the much acclaimed teaching of altruism that is already written in early, only 2 centuries before by Shantideva, in which it also talks about bodhicitta very much. But this idea of using the selfishness as the inner enemy, that one need to find a weapon, like a wheel of sharp weapon, is this teaching how to conquer the ego by practicing selflessness. So Dharmarakshita's text is a lot more, digestible, because it doesn't go into any of the philosophical arguments, but it goes straight into things that are relevant, that everyone, that Atisha said will be in degenerate time, will find very useful to apply. So that's why, and this wheel of sharp weapons is such a small text, but hardly heard about it. But I remember in 1970, I think 5, when I went on a short pilgrimage to India, and then I went to Dharamsala on the way back to Lumbini, that the Geshe Ngawang Dargye, a very famous Geshe-la, who used to be the resident teacher at the first and most revered resident teacher at Tibetan Library and Works Archives, he was teaching these wheel of sharp weapons. And he just gave the teaching and the transmission in one afternoon, and I was happened to be there. And later on, then he also came to New Zealand in 1983, and he gave the same. So I was able to hear this teaching directly from him. So therefore, it's a text that I have an actual transmission of, and I haven't really looked closely into the English. And last few months, when we were preparing for this, I've been sort of looking at a couple of existing translations and then making some changes. So that's why we are going to replenish you with more text as each class progresses. They're not entirely my translation, by the way. So there's a couple of previous translations as well. Anyway, so wheel of sharp weapons. He called this wheel because it's like a circle of our life experiences and difficulties. It seems to be repeating. So he says to cut the wheel from turning, one needs to get this teaching on Lojong, striking at the heart of the enemy. Heart of the enemy is selfishness. He's referring to the demon of selfishness as the actual enemy that very few teachings recognize that, because often society is pointing finger out there, others pointing finger to the world, others pointing finger to some faults of some other people who create the world, and very few actually point the finger to the ego within. So in Buddhism we have a state of sainthood called arhathood. The arhathood is often called foe destroyer. Those who have succeeded to destroy the inner foe, that's inner enemy, the self-grasping or cognitive obscuration, believing self is real and then becoming slave to it. So here, becoming master to use the self not as selfish purposes but selfless purposes and honoring other sentient beings will be the sharp weapon that actually slays and destroys the ego, but actually becomes a wheel of dharma for oneself. So all one's sufferings and cycles, machination of sufferings and stories, difficulties, instead of becoming a repetitive vicious cycle for suffering, it will sort of slice all the sufferings and will turn them into a wheel of dharma, so that one is actually to use all one's knowledge of dharma to destroy the inner kind of cognitive obscuration of subtle grasping to the ego, striking at the heart of the enemy. Of course, the enemy really in Buddhism is not a cause of problem. Enemy is the one that actually teaches us the compassion, tolerance, and forgiveness. Teaching only teaches theoretically, but actual practice we have to do only when we meet with enemy. But often people think it's enemy, the outside enemy. But here in this Lojong teaching, the enemy is the selfishness. So that's why the Dharmarakshita says, wheel of sharp weapons. So let's look at the text now. Homage to the triple gem, homage to the wrathful Yamantaka. So here the Dharmarakshita pays homage to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, to the triple gem, as well as the wrathful form of Yamantaka. Yamantaka is always wrathful anyway. Yamantaka means Lord of Death. Yama means death. Taka means one who stops death. Actually, if one is egotistical, one is dying all the time. Yeah. If one is selfless, then one is actually destroying that inner Yama that kills us unconsciously. So, therefore, paying homage to the triple gem is for the purpose of the blessed, benevolent effect that this teaching would have. You know, this is not a long text, only 118 verses, so it's only about 10 pages. But nevertheless, it enjoyed currency during his lifetime. It inspired the likes of Atisha, and whose influence in Tibetan Buddhism is so huge, you wouldn't believe. He's regarded as only second only to Padmasambhava in terms of Padmasambhava came to Tibet in middle of late 7th century, early 8th century, and he started Buddhism together with Shantarakshita and many other great Indians. But Atisha's coming in the second spread of Buddhism, revival of Buddhism, was mostly done by Atisha. But Atisha was influenced by teacher like Dharmarakshita and his teaching, and no doubt this writing. Towards the end of I think verse number, I can't remember exactly, about 92 or somewhere, the two very key words that Lojong practitioners use are found in this text. It has to, because this is the earlier text, earlier than the LangrI Thangpa's text or Chekhawa's text, or for that matter even Atisha's text. This text predates all the others. So the idea of saying give all the credit to others, accept all the blames to yourself. So that's actually originally found in this text. So that shows how classical and earliness of this text is. So he pays homage to Triple Gem, mainly for the successfulness of his writing, because no authors in Buddhist tradition or any other activities Buddhist person should do without taking refuge in the Triple Gem, in order to dispense great many blessings from his work as an author. So that's homage to wrathful Yamantaka. Because he pays homage to the deity Yamantaka. Yamantaka is the father Tantra, wrathful deity, which has spread to Tibet in many Tibetan Buddhist traditions. All tradition has a practice of Yamantaka. And here the Yamantaka is one who wrathful form of Manjushri. So wrathful form of Manjushri. Because Manjushri is a Buddha wisdom to understand the perfection of wisdom. And so the teaching of the perfection of wisdom, the Heart Sutra we just read, is a text Heart Sutra, deity Heart Sutra, teaching Heart Sutra, and realization Heart Sutra. It's very different things. So without the text, people forget the teachings. And then there's a goddess Prajaparamita, there's deity, because in order that people who are illiterate, who can't do the Heart Sutra, they meditate on the deities, like Prajaparamita, on the wrathful form of that is Yamantaka, So in many ways to realize selflessness, to practice selflessness. They say practice selflessness is one who has truly slayed his or her inner Yama, One who has slayed the inner killer of their own spirit is selfless bodhisattva. So in this case, the Yamantaka is invoked to be able to actually turn the sharp weapon and to purify one's negative karmas. Because here at the reading of the text suggests later on that every time you are able to accept your karma, situations and learn to grow strong, then those things are actually destroying your selfishness and self-centeredness in the past, which has killed us out many times. Then you will be revived. So idea of invoking Yamantaka is try to symbolize the slaying of the ego, as a practitioner who reaches the great height of enlightenment. And this text there uses the analogies. At the very beginning, it uses the text, in jungles of poisonous plants strut the peacocks. So talking about the very understanding of animal life like bird. The peacocks, as you know, has very beautiful feathers and so on. Though medicine gardens of the beauty lie near, the masses of peacock don't find gardens pleasant, but thrive on essence of poisonous plants. So it's talking about how bodhisattva is likened to peacock. And bodhisattvas do not seek worldly material or gains, but rather work with deluded sentient beings. Like peacock lives on poisonous plants, but he living on poisonous plants actually makes his body and feathers grow very beautiful without being affected. So one who has this sharper weapon to turn the poison into medicine, yeah? So therefore, the afflictions should not, and karma and affliction should not be seen something to discard, but rather to transform. If you have this skill like that of this poison, like the peacock. So here, the peacock is likened to bodhisattva. In similar fashion, the brave bodhisattvas remain in the jungle of the worldly concern. So that's why bodhisattvas do not claim nirvana. That's called nirvana of cessation. They rather stay in the thicket of jungle of samsara, where there's a lot of sufferings, yeah? So remain in the jungle of worldly concerns, gain, victory, praise, and so on. Worldly people are always concerned on these worldly objectives. So here the bodhisattvas actually mix with the sentient beings who are deluded. No matter how joyful the world's pleasure gardens, these brave ones are never attracted to pleasures, but thrive in the jungle of suffering and pain. So this means that even trainee bodhisattvas like us, we have a tendency to usually run away from suffering or causes of suffering or immediate conditions of suffering and shun them. But one who understands the teaching of the Lojong should actually learn to work with those very difficult situations, learn to grow, and so that when one is in this jungle of suffering, you know the thicket and the causes of the sufferings. And then when you know the cause of suffering, you have compassion for beings. Most of them do not know where the suffering stemmed from. A bodhisattva knows this severity of the sentient being suffering. Therefore, instead of running away or fleeing from them, but he actually learns to work with the helpless sentient beings whose pain becomes the great benefactor of his compassion. So what is the wheel of a sharp weapon here is that we as individuals, when we have difficulties or place of work or wherever, one should not run away, but rather should work with these as a brave bodhisattva should do. Because you will grow strong like a peacock by living on those plants. His feathers getting more beautiful than the others. But wait until you're really peacock-like. He says, we spend our whole lives in search of enjoyment, yet tremble with fear at the mere thought of pain. Thus, since we are cowards, we are miserable still. But the brave bodhisattvas accept suffering gladly and gain from their courage our true lasting joy. Now, desire is the jungle of poisonous plants here. Only brave ones like peacocks can thrive on such fare. How would the cowardly, selfish beings like crows manage the poison? So here the analogy is beautiful because ordinary beings who try to aim too high of course, will not be able to do that. So that's why one has to acquire the vision and aspiration, motivation of the bodhisattva. So that's why one should train to have the vision and the motivation of a bodhisattva, like the peacock, instead of like the ordinary sentient being who have only selfish purposes. So one who drops selfishness and adopts selflessness is the peacock-like ability. But one who doesn't realize the selfishness of theirs is the root cause of suffering, and then try to do whatever, maybe attack external enemy and so on, then only they will not manage the poison, because they will be killed and destroyed by that very poison themselves. So therefore, what it really means is how to see the demerit of selfishness and weigh the benefit of selflessness, and how the selfless motivation, the bodhicitta motivation, should be conceived. As we say the prayer, like you try to conceive it and you get inspired by it, and then you make a little promise, try to practice selflessness. And when you are practicing selflessness, of course, the suffering sentient beings around you, you will not shun or run away from them, but rather try to be patient and compassionate and tolerant. If you have the endurance to practice that, you are learning to become like a peacock, because you have now the selfless intention, which empowers you to not defeated by the sufferings, but actually, strengthened by the sufferings. Suffering makes you to grow strong and wiser, instead of make you feel weak and run away from it. And so if our bodhicitta is thriving, then you are actually growing like a peacock. But if an ordinary sentient being, like crow-like sentient being who only thinks of himself, then he cannot eat those those plants. He will die instantly. So therefore, without seeing the merits of bodhicitta, you cannot practice bodhicitta. But to do that, we have to be disgusted with the demerits of selfishness. The suffering it causes to oneself, one's in mind and one's own body and one's own reactions and so on and so forth. One has to be able to be developed by some kind of a strong sense of disgust, saying that's real poison. I cannot. So by doing this, it only makes me sick. So therefore, our peacock-like bodhisattva, having conceived the bodhicitta very well, it's now adopting that and drop the selfishness and adopt you will see the word adopt and drop quite a lot in this text later on, because adopt refers to adopt bodhicitta. Adopt means selfishness. So if you're doing that, then the wheel of sharp weapon is destroying the poisons and making yourself to turn the wheel of Dharma. The sufferings of life is actually making your karma become exhausted by the difficulties, because you're now well armed and well armored with bodhicitta. If you're well armored with bodhicitta, then you are like a beautiful fighter, like a peacock. He is not defeatable by the plants that he eats. But the more poisonous plants he eats, I'm sure there will be some degree what the peacock can eat or not. I'm sure there some people who understand biology and botany would know what peacocks can eat and what they can't eat. Buddha seems to have a lot of understanding. He talks about, they say, only Buddha knows why peacock's feathers are so beautiful, why peas are so round, why thorns so sharp. What caused this to develop? So there will be some degree of this. So this analogy therefore shows to practice selflessness is like peacock. To do selfish things is like a crow. Using this analogy, it says, if he applied other afflictions, like a crow, he would probably forfeit his chance to live. The bodhisattvas are likened to peacocks. They live on delusions, those poisonous plants, because they see the poisonous afflictions are themselves not themselves, let alone the object. It's just a kind of a obscuration that mars your mind, that masks your ability to see. So the poisons are not objects or even yourself. The poisons are just a bad constitution of the mind, and hence the bodhisattvas are like peacocks, because they live on doesn't mean they eat them, but they actually know how to transform them. They know how to transform the afflictions that looks only poison to those who haven't got the skill, but those who know the skill, the poisons can be made into medicine. He says it's a question isn't so much what is poison and what is medicine, but who knows the constituent of poison and constituent of the medicine. If one doesn't handle very well, even medicine can become poison, and poison can, understanding of virus makes them to develop all these vaccines. So therefore, bodhisattvas are people who study the virus and develop the vaccines. They're not destroyed by the virus, but they're interested in the virus. So the afflictions are like therefore, the very cause of developing the remedies. So that's why bodhisattvas are likened to peacocks, transforming them into the essence of practice. They will transform all seemingly like aggressive-looking situations or volatile-looking situations. The bodhisattvas will thrive to develop the very antidote to de-escalate the problem through their compassion, through their tolerance, through their meditation on impermanence and emptiness, and so on, will empower them to learn to de-escalate, and therefore they will not be poisoned by this. They will be able to remedy them, transforming them into essence of practice. So these dot points, we have got 6 dot points. The first six verses are more like introducing the idea. Whatever is presented, they voluntarily accept. Now this is what says in the later section, say accept all the blame. Say when whatever is presented, such as blame or whatever, the bodhisattva voluntarily accept, because as soon as they accept the suffering, it's not saying they are entirely at fault. Bodhisattva know better than that. Everything is interdependent, so they know exactly. We are not saying it's all your fault. This is quite unhealthy to say it is. But being able to accept that completely changes the very contents of the problem. They voluntarily accept it, because as soon as they accept it, they will destroy the very poison of selfishness. One who reacts to it is selfishness self-react, like the crow, and then only to make the problem escalate. So bodhisattva who is calm-headed is able to voluntarily accept the suffering or the difficulties and make sure their own poison. Not that bodhisattvas have poison, but no, they actually know how to decontaminate the contaminated situation. They know exactly how to purify the water because they got the tablet. So more the dirty the water, the more interested the water engineer will be. If it's already clean water, he's got nothing to do. So he has to study the water and its contents so that he can tell what's wrong with the water and what it can be turned. Likewise, a bodhisattva is one who is expert in emotions. These emotions are impermanent, transient. It's a composite of many factors. It's not them or not the object. It is just mixture of many, many factors. So it's a composite of many, we call aggregates of feelings. Emotion is an aggregate of many, many components and then create. So because of that, they know how to reduce certain composites and then they will show the emptiness of the composite. Because all the composite are basically called transient collections. You don't even have to destroy poison. but it doesn't exist from its own side. It is by nature impermanent. Uncontrollably wandering through the rounds of existence is this messenger of demon grasping at ego as real. So this is the very enemy they're referring to, is this uncontrollable through this wandering through rounds of existence. Doesn't mean just life after life. Even within one life, one could go, the mind could go from very strong jealousy, like the demigods, to the anger and the sort of resentment, like that of hell, or miserliness, like that of hunger and craving, like the hungry ghost. So talking about not just life after life, but within a couple of hours, if a person whose mind is a little bit sort of emotionally very stressed could be going through rounds like the demon, and grass as caused by the very obscuration, thinking I and me and my problem. So as the ego is real, and so is the problem as real. The one who has the selflessness, the bodhisattva, he doesn't see that as he doesn't become the messenger of the demon of ego. He now becomes the messenger of Yamantaka to destroy the very self-centered, uncontrollable ego. He is now able to recognize that demon grasping at ego as real. Ego as real means your body as real, your feeling as real, your perception is real. And your deeds as real, or your visual or mental consciousness is real. People don't realize what they're seeing is only a painting caused by their own thoughts and emotions that are marred by their own desire, hatred, ignorance, unfulfilled wishes. They don't realize that. If they realize that, they know it's not real. They know it's exaggerated. By afflictions, and so one wouldn't be mauled by the demon. So he is saying that this teaching will help oneself to destroy this poison or demon and turn all the unfavorable circumstances one is undergoing through as the exhauster of the karma to hit at the strike at the heart of the enemy of ego. So therefore, that's the introductory six I would say, the verses. Number 7 and 8 is where the actual teaching now begins. One should part from that concern and happiness for oneself alone. So that's the kind of bodhisattva should first part from this concern and happiness for oneself. If one is complaining and unhappy, it's usually to do with being for what one didn't get, and one is so concerned happiness for oneself. Gladly take on hardship for the sake of others. So exactly opposite. So you drop the selfishness and adopt the selflessness. That first sentence really very much says the acceptance of the hardships of others on one's shoulder is the what we call len, meaning tong len practice. You are taking on the hardships of others on your shoulder, and you therefore show more concern for them rather than yourself. That's actually what you call tong, meaning because you're sending your concern is now for the others. When you say concern is for the sake of others' happiness, you're practicing loving kindness. When you're taking on the hardships of others on yourself, you're practicing compassion. This is a kotonglen. The main thrust of the Lojong practice is to practice compassion and wisdom. Compassion and loving kindness, compassion. Loving kindness is to show concern of other people's well-being. So even if you practice tolerance, you're not trying to prove that you're better than them. That's not the purpose. Purpose is if you practice tolerance, it may make a little bit happier, easier for the other person, and also you may accept some of the blames for which the suffering is there. So you take on hardships on yourself, because being patient is usually not so easy. They call forbearance. You have to bear the hardships for a greater purpose. So then you are really making the wheel of sharp weapons to turn when you have to take on the hardships on yourself for the sake of others. If one, a lot of people practice this, but what the wrong motivation? To look good on oneself and paint a bad picture of other people. But even if one do practice a tolerance, it should be for the sake of others. Intentionally, it should be for the sake of others. So this is out of compassion. So patience is motivated by compassion, and concern for others is motivated by loving kindness. So this first sentence in the verse number 7 pretty much encapsulate the Tonglen practice. The suffering of like-minded sentient beings. So then we're talking about anyone you know a little bit about each other, their complaints, their sufferings and all, which are evenly swayed by karma and habituated by afflictions. Then you know that your suffering that you are learning to accept is basically universal. It's prevalent. And so sufferings of like-minded sentient beings, which are evenly swayed, their suffering as much as our suffering are swayed by karma and habituated by afflictions. So when one knows the central cause of the suffering is one's own propensity and habits, then there's not a lot out there that is the problem. Because should be poured into self-centeredness. See, all the sufferings that we usually try to push it away, we should actually use the sufferings we have poured into the self-centeredness and smother the selfish concerns by the very... because when you're doing that, you are turning the very karma and habituation and afflictions to exhaust them. Otherwise, they become round and round, go to vicious cycle. By learning to pour it into the very self-centeredness, saying this is the tricks and effects of past selfishness, now it's ripening now. For we have now conceived bodhicitta and merit of selflessness. We have now conceived and we are armored with the weapon to have a good sort of good fight to defeat the self-centeredness, which previously escapes our mind. We haven't got the cognitivity to recognize this selfishness as a root of the cause of problem. Now, when we experience the karma and effect of that now, and then when you pour that very into an analogy, pour that into the self-centeredness, and then that very self-centeredness itself will be smothered. Which means it will exhaust your karma. It will exhaust your karma, maybe not so pleasantly, but exhaustion of karma is like treatment. Treatment is not pleasant. Most people don't have treatment, so the pleasantness of treatment, but so that they have recovery in the long run, So therefore, one who has this formidable ability to see the benefit of the treatment, never mind the hardships the treatment presents, but have a little some kind of effect of that, actually one becomes well. Next time, of course, should the impulse arise now to seek our own pleasure, see that if there's a lingering selfishness there, repel it. And one should give all one's happiness to other beings. So instead of try to sort of be defensive of oneself and prevent us from suffering, if you have a tendency to do that because we're seeking happiness, he says that's actually selfishness coming back again. So learn to repel that and wish others happiness from your being able to do that, instead of maybe dedicate the tolerance or that you're going through, instead of putting the emphasis for one's own benefit and happiness and pleasure. Should the impulse arise is a very understatement. It will arise. It will arise. You have to be very good for a patch of time that doesn't arise at all. Usually it arises. So if you arise and you recognize the arising when it arising, that's exactly what the Bodhisattva is now in the making, because he can detect this demon of self-cherishing, and he can repel it. And where and when it happens, happens, and then he instead give all his virtues and merit of doing this for the happiness of all beings, which was saying, may this little effort of mine goes out to benefit others towards whom which I didn't practice in the past. So therefore one is actually conquering the demon, the very self-cherishing in that manner. So in the first part of the text is a little bit gentle in terms of how to train your mind, train your attitudes, I suppose. Being able to detect, you are trying to smother your selfish concern, seeing that like-minded sentient beings and one's own sufferings are very, very similar, or just maybe of a different variety, but they're all in a very similar pattern. And then you develop compassion, saying, most beings don't have the literacy to know how to do anything about it. But I, having heard or read the Mahayana teachings in general, and particularly this teaching on Lojong, then one says, I have at least the exposure that there is a remedy to recognize the selfishness itself can be conquered there and then by not thinking, poor me, why it's happening to me, because it's not. It's happening to everybody. It says to all like-minded sentient beings. They may be not identical sufferings, but if you talk to them, very identical suffering. So then you put yourself and others all in the same boat, and therefore have the ability to arrest your selfishness, and then not to put itself into this me and my well-being so much, but well-being of others, so they therefore repel it. And any effort that you do, you dedicate the merit for the benefit of others. So one is actually should give all one's happiness to other beings. Now, if you can apprehend the affliction when it arises, it is a happiness. You didn't have this joy of apprehending, let alone conquering. Now you're apprehending and repelling and being able to de-escalate. That is a cause of happiness. You can dedicate that to others who you know you wish they'd had. You wish someone was a little bit more tolerant or more kind or more forgiving. But how do? You resent that they're not? No. As a Lojong practitioner, do a little bit like this, and then you dedicate for them. Amazing, multi-purpose they call it. Multi-purpose. It's not just for me or oneself trying to prove how good I am, but even the slight benefit I have, may this have some kind of ripple effect to others who we know are struggling, who we know have not heard any lessons like that at all. So when you're able to do that, then you are actually wishing happiness to others, while you are actually experiencing, exhausting, smothering your own selfish concern by the ripening of the whatever difficulties there may be. Not only that this is worthy of dedicating virtues to others, but it is virtuous because you can tell you have the emotional fitness to think like that. Usually we don't have emotional fitness or intellectual clarity to think and reason like that. We will be unreasonably, irrationally thinking opposite way. So this is meritorious. This is a merit that normally we do not see the merit. This comes from the virtue of practicing bodhicitta. They say bodhicitta practice is not like plantain tree that looks good, straight tree, but hollow inside. You may look very awfully difficult, but in that pile of sufferings, you are actually growing to become very strong, and then being able to repel the problem from escalating. Basically, you're able to delay your childish reaction, and of course, not at all you react. You're repelling it, knowing it is destructiveness. And that being able to control itself is a merit that others have no capacity. They call zero tolerance or something. But now you're developing this percentage of tolerance in you are developing as a result of this small, though maybe percentage of your tolerance, but you're still dedicating it while you're practicing that. Now, this is what the Bodhisattva, it's not just like beautiful feathers we're talking about, but the mind itself looking very beautiful, if you like, the beautiful mind. It be able to think and reason and analyze like that, and without feeling being, defeated by the suffering. Even if loved ones should rise up against us. So now this is talking about how to actually turn the wheel of sharp weapons against the ego. Yeah? Even if loved ones or friends and others should rise up against us, either directly or indirectly, or verbally or physically, we must blame our self-interest and feel it's our outstanding debt. So if somebody or your loved ones go and attack you, whatever, you should see that as a result of your own past wrong karma now ripening as a debt, This stops you from reacting and making it doubling. Because that's exactly what the Bodhisattva now is well armed and armored to have a real battle to destroy unpaid karma of the past. So outstanding debt, outstanding tolerance, outstanding patience, outstanding non-acceptance of blame. All of those, even if we accept blame but the wrong reasons, wrong motivations, all those outstanding debt are now being ripened. Feel it's our outstanding debt. So we have a responsibility. Bodhisattva isn't saying he's going to liberate all the world like that before he himself does his own responsibility. When our bodies are aching and racked with unbearable and dreadful diseases, so this is talking about the Lojong practitioner. When you have physical problems, this is the sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from the injury we have caused to others' bodies. Sometimes, of course, we might not want to think like that. It's too bad already, to think that it's a result of past doing. It just makes us feel almost less prepared, we might feel that's too much, It's like trampling on top of you falling down. So we might feel that. That's exactly the question of what degree of a bodhisattva you are, Are you able to think that these are the result of my past karma harming to other beings? Because teaching says there is concordant experiential karma, concordant habitual karma. Concordant experiential karma is if our body is going through some hardships, pains, and so on, because they are already there. You can't deny the problems. What is the cause? We don't know. So at least this you don't have to find out. Teaching says you've done similar things to others. And then, of course, you say, really? Okay, I'll accept that. Even you don't accept, you're going to go to suffering anyway. So therefore, it helps oneself to think, maybe I have caused such injury to other beings. I was listening to a recording a few days ago by a very eminent teacher in Eastern Tibet these days. Nowadays they put all these things on you can listen to. He said all this in the old days, all the violent things were men who did these things. You don't see women doing any violent things, but they actually take a lot of pills. And they destroy many would-be babies. They don't realize it has consequences. Sure, it has sweet consequences now not having to carry the baby, but he says that lots of people take a lot of pills as a young woman without realizing they're actually killing these young would-be persons. And he says the karma of those, of course, it wasn't done for the sake of the child. It could be sometimes but obviously it was not thought through carefully what would be the consequences of that. Because whatever harm we cause to others' lives, it directly ripens upon oneself. So he has when a grown-up person suffers from certain illnesses, of course all the illnesses got varied causes and conditions. They're usually related to things what we did to other bodies. If it's physical problems, other bodies what one has caused to others. From now on, we will take on all the illnesses. So what you do is, your illnesses and physical problems, as a Lojong practitioner, one should see that as a wheel of sharp weapon turning to destroy your karma, and therefore not only one accept one's illness, but also pray that may all the sufferings that are there, whose ill health is worse than ours, have no medication, no care, no health care, none of these things we have. But may those who have similar and have any cure for them, may all of their suffering ripen upon me. So that's the saying. It says, may they ripen and take on all of their suffering. Usually in Lojong it says you visualize, inhale the sufferings of others. Here you don't have to visualize. You already got your own karma ripening, and then on top of that you imagine all the suffering of other beings are ripening on ours, and so that their sufferings are exhausted. So your suffering becomes catalyst for compassion to others whose other suffering. So it straight away adopts the bodhicitta, adopt the selflessness. But usually when we suffer from these kind of things, we often, if not in a good mood, we feel, why me? Why should I go like this? And then one becomes frustrated and anger, and then one resort to all kinds of other things that it doesn't help, drug or alcohol, or people who are depressed because they're not able to think like this with illnesses or loss of loved ones or whatever. They think it's all their fault, and they're looking very negatively toward themselves. They are not able to transform those experiences as a way to conquer the demon of selfishness. When depressed, now that's the physical one. When depressed, forlorn, and feel mental anguish, this is the when depressed, forlorn, and mental anguish is as a result of not being able to do that with the physical aim. Now, if you're able to deal with that, take on the sufferings of others, you would not be depressed. You will feel useful. I know recently a Tibetan lady died, and she was suffering for 2 years in bedridden. Her voice was losing by every week, but the advice she gave to her children and husband was like no other, Like she was saying, look, I'm so fortunate. I've been born as a precious human rebirth. I have met amazing teacher like His Holiness Dalai Lama. I have been able to bring up all your children, and all of you are doing very well. Now, even if you live many more years, what's the point of it? So therefore, don't worry about me. So she was actually give advice to the actual exhausted carers usually, but they were all like completely consoled. Before she passed away, they just found a new person in each of themselves. What a great delight it is to see someone losing their life to this terrible disease, but even not able to speak, writing these beautiful advices saying how to think like this. Now, that's exactly what we're talking about, how one should not be trashed by illnesses and diseases, but one should grow strong and make one's life more meaningful, and because otherwise one will be depressed, forlorn, and anguish. So it says, when depressed, forlorn, and feel mental anguish, this is the weapon of evil karma turning upon me from the mental torture we have caused. So it's like, say, when we are mentally depressed or sad or lonely or whatever it is, it may look like we haven't got that, or they didn't do this to me. Maybe that's what we think. But actually not. It's exactly opposite. It's we ourselves has caused mental torture to others in the past. So therefore, one should learn to exhaust the karma by not thinking this way, but instead thinking how to take on the sufferings of others. And then it says universalize the suffering. In the previous verses, talk about like-minded sentient beings. All sentient beings are in the same boat. There's no one is in a silver-plated boat. Everybody is in a leaky boat. Everybody is going through this or that. Some people got this problem, but other people got those problems. So you look at it, suffering is universal. It's like there's not a single person is untouched by these sufferings. So by being able to think like that, we become more bold and not become coward. We become brave, not to be, I would say, defeated by this, but instead rise, having good reason how I should live more meaningfully. So suffering is the cause of giving rise to compassion, if we understand suffering. That's why Buddha didn't say practice compassion in the beginning. He says understand suffering, which is directly saying then you will be compassionate to yourself as well as to others. Being kind to ourselves is not to sort of being depressed and blame oneself or blame others. Seeing this is a result of past karma, and this will all be exhausted. So they will, because the karma is also not permanent. The good thing about that is the karma doesn't mean you are cursed. Karma means you can change it either way. It's the question is whether medicinally or poisonously. Even some pleasant karma, maybe favorable karma, if you're not careful, those pleasant karma could spoil us. If we are very wise, even difficult, difficulties when we meet, it can make us to turn that into what we call great blessings. Families who have discovered a person suffering from cancer or something, they say it was a miracle illness, because as soon as they knew their mother or someone then they really start living. Then they really start giving. Then they really start giving time for each other that they weren't free to do before, because the people think they got endless time to live. They don't. Everybody's life is numbered by their karma or lack of merit and so on and so forth. So when one is able to understand that, your mental constitution is predisposing to this bodhisattvic attitude. Otherwise, we are predisposing to this deluded attitudes, and then one makes the physical or emotional sufferings as a cause to react to. And then one, instead of thinking like this, because if you can think like that, you can see the Buddha was sitting under the tree, almost bringing on the sufferings on his body, as that was not enough, because he can't grow in the palace. Palace was just too. He said, "This is the bodhisattva who doesn't want to live in the beautiful garden. He wanted to go in where the poisons are." You see, that's the peacock, where the other birds might go in a beautiful garden and they're like that. But bodhisattvas, instead of indulging in that, he went straight under one tree and sit there motionless in order to meet and deal with the root and the very core of the sufferings. His own body was emaciated. He basically forsake food and drink. Not so much it's enjoyable, but it is opening. It is giving him the understanding of this life that is so misunderstood. And therefore his own practice was not a kind of penance, but was a purification. It was really like a best treatment. Best treatment for a young man who's not sick. But he realized there was a mental kind of a constitution that needs to be deconstituted through this training, and therefore his meditation practice became the very thing, like the peacock. You know, it looked like during the first 6 years when he was sitting on the tree, it didn't look like a peacock, you know. His body was emaciated and weak and so on. But of course, his body, as soon as he had one meal, after he woke up from meditation, this is just before he got enlightened. After one meal, his body just regained his composure like no other. Within a few hours, his body had the most glorious embodiment of enlightened one with 112 major and minor distinctive marks of fully enlightenment. Where does that come from? Mental constitution. We're talking about lots of people. They become great leaders in knowing how to remain firm and strong in times of crisis, in times of difficulties. So therefore, one who doesn't think like that usually react opposite way and only to escalate the problem. So therefore, he says, one should think that when you have some onslaught of a physical pain and mental starting worry, if you're not careful, you could make it worse. But even the very ripening of the thing that you're going through itself is actually exhausting. That is the very weapon that's now striking at the very heart of the enemy of sufferings. So it's like a surgery or like a any kind of treatment that requires some kind of pain. Even poking a needle is not pleasant, you know. People don't take the needle injection for the enjoyment. They take it for the sake of treatment. So like that, a bodhisattva should think of that and not let it defeat his purpose. From now on, let me take on all sufferings myself. So now the bodhisattva is the bodhisattva is now well conceived of bodhicitta, and he's very well armored with bodhicitta. He says, from now on, when we have talked already about physical pain and mental anguish, when one goes through, one knows how to take on the sufferings of others. So these are, because physically and emotionally, you know, we might not be able to do normally, but when you are able to do that, from now on, not just in times of physical or emotional crises, from now on, let me take on all sufferings, whatever it is, whatever the sufferings are, because now you know how to transform them. Now you're not intimidatable by sufferings. Bodhisattvas are courageous warriors, warriors who do not have who do not have any external enemy, but who only goes to help sentient beings who are helpless and unable to help themselves. So, by us taking on some suffering, it will at least make a little difference to the one next to you. When hunger or violent thirst overwhelms me, sometimes practitioners deliberately take vows of fasting, for instance. One day, half day, next day, whole day. And so Nyungne is done like that. First day is only up till lunch, you eat 2 meals, and up to no. Then second day, no meal, no drink at all. Just to experience what's like to experience hunger and thirst. And to experience the hunger and in a very fit mind. Some people want to do 21-day fasting, you know, for health reasons. But if one does any little bit of fasting for the reason of enshrining bodhicitta, you know, meditating on those who have nothing to eat. And we're talking about the human realm. We're not talking hungry ghost. We're talking about next door neighbor. Just countries in the Pacific. Or somewhere even within our own frontiers. what's like to be poor and homeless and hungry and thirsty like that. We have no idea what's really like and deal with it. So when hunger and violent thirst overwhelm me, either by causes a condition or we deliberately do it, sometimes the induced method is you deliberately take the precepts and fast and do the practice and stay in retreat and so on. This is the evil karmic weapons turning full circle upon me from plundering, stealing, and miserliness. So a bodhisattva therefore trains his mind that any kind of impatience in us that we cannot tolerate the hunger and thirst, we think we'll die or something, you know. We straight away worry about ourselves. It's very easy to detect that selfishness straight away. But when people do for fast for 40-hour famine or various reasons, then nobody dies, you know. they know they won't die. The cause is greater than the misery. So when the cause is good, they can fast, you know. Of course, not everybody will be in a physical condition to fast. I'm not saying that. You know, we have to be gentle with our health. But general teaching is that when you do experience hunger and thirst and for whatever reasons, I'm sure you will quickly find something to allay that by eating or drinking. That's the quickest way. But it doesn't teach us anything. But they deliberately observe hunger and thirst. They call vow of poverty or vow of simplicity, or having just as one kind of meal, not a varieties of delicacies. So when one is craving for particular food, even though one has other things to eat, but one still is hungry because one keep thinking about the other thing to eat. So talking about things like that, one should use that as a teaching how much inconsiderate plundering and stealing of other people's things. And yes, some people are really born in hungry place. They don't have food. They're not there. Next door neighbor is quite wealthy. There's a lot of wealthy people in that town. So there must be some past karmic causes and conditions, you know. We're not talking only about wealth, so poverty. We're talking about also people who are wealthy, you know. They may have a lot of things, but they're never happy. So whatever is the condition, one needs to see that as a pointer. The teaching is a pointer that what must have I done in the past that I'm stuck in a country or a place where there is no clean water, where there is no clean drinking water or healthy food, or not even enough food, let alone the choicest ones. They only have one kind. I remember when we were in the refugee camp, we didn't have many. Sometimes we just every day they give us a bag of white beans. You know. We don't know what to do with white beans. Morning white bean, afternoon white bean, evening white bean. So we never mind as long as we got some white beans. You know, you can see most people didn't digest. They go to the toilet, they're white beans. So we became a passage of white beans, not much. White bean didn't go anywhere. Anyway, and as a result of that, a lot of people were dying, you know. And of course we had karma. We created those karma. We plundered people in the past life. We were Kampa robbers, I think. In the past, one is not going hungry by accident, you know. There are reasons. So, of course, some of these are not relevant in countries where we have plenty, you know, plentiful to eat. But we could think of still them mentally. People have this thing, I don't have this, I don't have this, I don't have this. Always hungry, still hungry and starving for something. And as if whatever they have is not enough, still starving. So this is exactly what we're talking about. What was this? Because we previously robbed from those people, stolen from other people, or whatever. They are a result of this. When you're able to think like that, it straight away makes us to see the cause and effect relationship, you know. It doesn't have to be accurately correct. It doesn't have to be 100% correct. It just helps us to teach us to cope and strategy to cope and not react negatively and deal with that in a very productively as a bodhisattva. Why? That whale of sharp weapon has directly hit. So the teaching has not only taught us, but it has pointed us to what to think, when, how, and therefore curtail the problem that was otherwise going to, predispose, make us feel sad and worried. A lot of people have so much sufferings, and then they can't cope with the suffering, and they then turn to violence and alcohol and drug and all of that. But this kind of thinking strategy, this kind of lojong, law means mind, jong means teaching the mind to what predisposition to adopt, and what predisposition to cancel, and what predisposition to recruit. Recruit. You can recruit new predisposition, and you will never be punished for thinking like this. There's no negative consequences. This is only positive. It's teaching you to become strong. From now on, let me take on hunger and thirst. Deliberately sort of said, they say, skip a meal. See whether it increases your bodhicitta or selfish citta. This amazing, famous nun, Indian nun, Gelong Palmo, she used practicing fasting to increase her bodhicitta. Her body was covered with boils of leprosy. It was just, there's nothing. But she used the bodhicitta to fast, not to worry about her infection, but to give rise to bodhicitta for the others who don't have even these practices. So her suffering became the cause of her increasement of bodhicitta. Nyung ne, nyung means suffering, ne means abide in suffering, not run away from. Why? With altruistic motivation. How can I turn my suffering into useful suffering? Because we go through a lot of useless suffering that only escalate the suffering, doesn't cause any depletion of the suffering. This way of looking at the suffering is, let me take on hunger and thirst.
What's the nun's name?
Gelongma Palmo. Yeah, Gelongma Palmo. Her Sanskrit name is Lakshmi Kara. She's the only of the 8 female in the 84 Mahasiddhas. Yeah, Lakshmi Kara is her name. Beautiful story. Not a long story, but she was a princess, and most beautiful princess. Everybody wanted to marry her, but she was even married away by the most choicest prince, I suppose. But soon, when she contracted the illness, everybody abandoned her. Even not only the prince, the whole family, nobody wants to go near her because everybody will be contracting the illness. She wasn't able to move even. She was completely stuck on her chest on the floor. Only food that's on the right because everywhere is just infected. But she was, her suffering became a great cause for her to, then she had a great meeting with a practitioner who said, you should recite Avalokiteshvara mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. And she will actually meet Avalokiteshvara one day. And then she did just, in spite of her illness was just nobody wants to go near her. There wasn't even an inch of her body that is not covered by the boils. Everywhere was oozing and infected and so difficult. But later, she got the teaching of bodhicitta, and then she turned her sickness, nyung means suffering, ne means she abide in the suffering rather than try to recover. She tried to make her suffering last long so that her compassion is tested and contested. Because she knew others have much more despicable life than she has. She at least have precious human rebirth. She at least got a sound mind. She at least got refuge. She at least was turning to the Dharma than anything else. And later on, she completely healed herself through that practice. And she became the one and only female Mahasiddha, the saint. And she's really, you can call it anointed in the Judeo-Christian language. She was completely celebrated. Nowadays, all Tibetan Buddhists, in most monasteries, particularly all the nunneries, they do annually 8 sets of nyungne. 1,000 Nam Avalokitesh practice, and she wrote the practice, and you recite the Om Mani Padme Hum, do the 3 rituals 3 times a day, and then you sort of you deliberately observe hunger and thirst, and you don't drink any drink at all for the second day, not even water, but you do at least 3 3-hour sessions of practice, combined with prostration and chanting, while evoking compassion and meditating on the hungry ghosts, sentient beings, people dying, and animals dying of all kinds of torture. Just imagine that, the worse than boils. Think about how our fellow nearest kingdom, animal kingdom, suffers. How human beings treat them is enormous, unbelievable. When she thought about their suffering, hard boil is nothing. She used hard boil as a catalyst to expand how sentient beings are. She is like-minded, she's no better, no worse situation than others. She's much better. And then after doing that, she completely healed herself, and then became the amazing saint. And I don't think she ever made it to Tibet, but her influence in Tibet is enormous. You wouldn't believe the month of May, I think May to June, that full moon usually, those 16 days, people do 8 sets of nyungnes. 8 sets of nyungne means 2 days, 1 half day, 1 full day, 1 half day, 1 full day. And so one engages in that practice. So we have been doing that every year in Siba for the last 10 or 12 years since we had the place. And so quite a few people do all the 8 sets. Others do just 1 set or do half the set, depending on your health. We also have to go very slowly according to your health. But in any case, what does this point out is that you can induce yourself to feel hunger and thirst physically, and then, or some other things that your mind, life has not fulfilled your vision. You just focus on them and then meditate. When I lack freedom, now this is the second verse number 12. When I lack freedom, meaning that a lot of people are like that. Their life is always having to go under the direction of someone above you. When I lack freedom, meaning freedom as people who work around the clock, they have no freedom, but must obey others, whether it's the board, or whether it's your boss, or whether it's your whoever that it is. This is the weapon of evil karma turning upon me from looking down on those who were lowly and use them as servants for our own selfish needs. So the kind of the mistreatment, or even maybe nobody mistreats each other in a kind of professional workings. If someone does it, one should think, my boss is not bad. This is because I must have treated someone like this, So then at least your working relationship with him will not deteriorate, because you say, that's the nature of his job. If I was in his position, I will also have to give orders. Please come. Oh, you can't work. Oh, you can't have next day off. Please come. They will tell you when to show up. And there's some people crying because they couldn't find any day off what they wanted to. People have no freedom. And when you lack those freedom, which is quite a lot of time people are going through, isn't it? Some people are stuck in a job. First they applied for a permanent job. They got one. then they are permanently no freedom. permanently no freedom. And then they want to go, part-time. When they're part-time, they're stuck in part-time.
They wish they had more hours, then they can't get to that. So never freedom, no real freedom. Unless you have amazing, precious human rebirth. Majority of people's human rebirth is partially free, but not entirely free. Some you have always people say, "I work for myself." Do they really? Don't they have to always satisfy the customer? so you can, if you work for yourself, never have to work at all. That's not the case. You still have to do around the clock more. Some hours never count. So when one is going through those times when we think, I wish I could do this, I wish I don't have to do it, and having to work under people, with people, difficult people, one should not think it's the problem with the person or your job or a position, but instead one should think, I have been party to enslaving others as slave or as put looking down over others and treating them with contempt and all of this. Some people have really difficult colleagues and they really are so harsh. And where we get from? So instead of thinking it's them, this is a karma ripening of similar things I may have myself consummated somewhere. By thinking these, at least you become more tolerant with your workplace, but at the same time you develop a little bit more tolerance, maybe forgiveness and compassion, and then think, what must be like to be him? Because I think I'm suffering a result of what I did in the past. Now I see he's doing to me. What would be his future like? Gosh, I'm sorry. I feel very sorry because he's going to get the result of this that I'm complaining in the future. Oh, poor thing, he's suffering. I'm at least exhausting my past suffering. He's creating new ones. So you will not be so negative to him or her, but rather cordial, rather tolerant, and more therefore brotherly and sisterly. And then you can see the bodhisattva is now emerging, because all work is like that. No work is satisfactory. No work is different. Some maybe differ a lot. Particularly if you are very picky, you are very specific about what job you will do, what you won't do. Some people are too qualified, and as a result of that, the chances of getting that very job you like is not good. All of a sudden you don't want to do that anymore. You feel completely controlled by this, and so this is the samsara's activities of unfinishable and discontent. All the discontent comes from causing similar sufferings upon others. When we are able to think like that, it totally helps us to mentally constitute and not blame others or blame yourself, but make yourself take responsibility. Isn't it? Taking responsibility to do something useful, productive with that, and not blaming yourself is a wrongdoing of my past, and then feel very depressed. That's not the suggestion at all. So if this is the reading we are getting the teaching wrongly. So that's not the case. Someone asked me saying, do you really should take the blame? Is it not my fault? Yeah, it's not saying it's your fault, but if you did not retaliate, they finished doing the blaming on you already. Now, if you take that as, I must have done similar things to other people. This is coming around me. If you did that, it prevents you from reacting. It prevents you from blaming them back. See, at least stop the karma from oscillating, From escalating or oscillating, I don't know, whichever you take. Maybe both. Yeah, they both rhyme as well. Because it's going round and round, it's oscillating, and escalating is getting higher and higher. Yeah, problem gets whipped. But as soon as you know that, it's not saying it's all my fault. Nothing is anyone's entire fault. The Bodhisattva's got much better teaching than that. Everything is interdependent, remember? Therefore, you are now putting a new interdependent clause which can liberate you out of interdependency, which is uncausing the vicious cycle. It is the interdependence to freedom of suffering. But otherwise, it is the vicious cycle of spinning the problem even further. So that's interdependent, the vicious cycle. When the wheel of life of shown in the Tibetan wheel of Dharma, it shows that it looks like this is the problem, how it starts. But it also says if you don't do that, this won't happen, this won't happen, this won't happen. And then all things are uncaused. The cause is stopped, the result, effect will minimize, and then wouldn't eventuate. So when we have a mental, I would say, cognitive clarity instead of cognitive obscuration, that's a lojong. Lojong means mental training. Now mind has a lot of clarity, and this clarity is empowers you to know the cause and effect relationship, and you can. The moment you have mental clarity, the obscuration of mind has decreasing, and the weight and the denseness and tenseness and uptightness is now opening up. It's like a meditation in real life, So when the teaching is heard, you have lojong in the hearing. When teaching is remembered, you will be thinking like this. This is lojong in the contemplation. You're thinking. You're thinking now according to the spirit of lojong. And because you happen to be predisposed to think like this, now your predisposition is gearing up like that of a bodhisattva, however young or new you may be, but at least your predisposition is now switched. Switch on this way, switch off the other way. Meditation means just how to guard that, not just sitting still. It means how to guard that where your boss is a little bit sort of bossy or a little bit aggressive. You straight away see, this wasn't me in the past. It looks awful. I didn't know I was like this. When he does this, I think it's him. But when I did it, I didn't really realize I was doing it. Then you be kind to him, won't you? You will cooperate to him and do exactly what you not exactly shaking heads there. So we will at least repel. Oh, come on, don't do that. It's not entirely his fault. There's a little bit of my karma happening out here. So when you're starting to, there's a monologue in your mind, there's already thinking lojong. Lojong is now thinking. Previously heard or read. Now your mind is now predisposed to think like that. And as a result, the mental constitution a little bit clearer, but you might feel a little bit tight in here, but in the head a little bit clearer, So lojong is firstly intellectual clarity, because lojong is mind training, but actually it's heart training. First, you have to have intellectual clarity. That's what Buddhism says. First, you have to reason, rationalize why this is happening. Thinking like this gives us an excellent alternative to the usual mindset that is so fixed in one mindset. It has no growth mindset available. Lojong means turning to the growth mindset, so that your mind is now learn to grow and not look in a negative way, and say that I used to treat others who are junior to me, newer, and so on, like this, to fulfill my selfish needs and make them do long hours or give them no freedom, ask them to come early and ask them to stay late. And I'm sure one is all used to doing that, different roles. As a parent, as a senior, as a supervisor, as a manager, people in more those roles. One doesn't even hesitate to do that, because the job description says you got to do that. You got to look after those 28 people. You have 28 people under you. Make sure that So you actually have to control them. So that is the nature of karma. So how do we do it? When you do that, there is almost, you understand, it is the interdependency of work environment that one has to listen to someone. And if you don't want any of that to do, of course that's your choice too. But since you have already signed up for that position, And you even applied for it. You even applied for it. It looks like now that they are not giving you freedom, but you were told exactly what are the causes, what are the conditions of your work would be. You said, yes, 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 I'm free. Yes, I'm free, any hour or whatever. And then one forgets that we wrote that. See, one self-created. This is all self-created situations. But one thinks it's them, you know. When we're going to grow up to practice, my work is service, you know. It is to serve other beings, whether it's a directly caring industry or whatever it is. It's always, those people who work many hours in the laboratory doing research or looking at a very small thing, hours, they should put their heart. And if I do good work, this is going to be beneficial, you know. So if one put the right attitude to the work, then of course the deadline or timeline one has to meet, it's good discipline, because when you don't have timeline, you don't perform very well. But when you do, you actually have to perform, because that's why one has been delegated, or one has been tasked to do that. So instead of thinking, I lack freedom, one should think, firstly, this is what I asked for. Secondly, I have done this to others, to myself. So instead of being rebellious to the task that is orientated, one should take on the sufferings and give a little bit of kind of breathing space to your boss or your colleagues or your others. And that's exactly what bodhicitta means. Bodhicitta doesn't mean, it's small acts of kindness, small acts of kind words, small kind gestures, and kind looks, and nods, and sort of acknowledgement. These are slowly, because it requires that kind of predisposition to dish those out. Because the opposite is quite easy. You don't even need a predisposition. It happens automatically. So how are we going to predispose ourselves? And how do when Dharmarakshita deliberately sat down and wrote these words, he, as a great celebrated master, is writing this from his experience, He wasn't thinking, there was no different problem in 10th century. Greed, hatred, ignorance, jealousy, pride, selfishness is very old, older than the rocks, I think. There's nothing more degenerate now, it was pretty degenerate those days. I read texts written in 10th century, the teachers are complaining it's degenerate age. They never said, I'm in such a wonderful time, unlike in 21st century when they will be really have to have. They never said that. They said their time was degenerate. I don't think there's a time degenerate, but definitely, as long as these 5 affliction controls us, sways us, to the extent of not giving us the cognitive ability to pause and then repel it, it still is as rampant as ever. And that's why Dharmarakshita's writing is as relevant and current as it ever was. There is never a time. That's why Atisha said, indegenerate time, meaning even later, like say 10, 100 years, 1,000 years later, the text is still enjoying currency and translation. There must be something in it that is still relevant, that are not found in other literatures that people read for pleasure. These kind of writings are worthy of carving on rocks. Yeah, there are lots of carved rocks in Indonesia. You go there, they bear the stories. Bodhisattvas who did this, what they call Jatakamala stories. All the past lives of Shakyamuni Buddha as a bodhisattva many lives. In each of those lives, he did these very practices, and those stories are carved, And the Borobudur, you go to Borobudur, is when you really study carefully, all the carvings are depicting all the Jatakamala stories that are in Sanskrit and so on. So the visual Dharma, people teaching this. That's how the people did. People did the practices for the benefit of others. Even those who built those big temples in Burma, they did so to in honor of their deceased father or mother or king or whatever, because they could never repay their kindness, and they built this monument as a physical, visual display of Dharma, so the rest of the humanity enjoy and learn the teaching through such beautiful monuments, which therefore actually shows this. These are not just writings in ink and on paper, but they actually have been lived like this by many bodhisattvas before, and their life are clearly documented. Not only their life biography clearly documented in writing, but all carved on rocks and on murals and so on. So these are not just poetic writings. These are well lived through convictions of the likes of celebrated masters like Dharmarakshita. So with this we'll conclude here tonight, and we do the dedication of merits of listening and contemplating and putting these teachings in our thoughts. So on page 11 we do the dedication merits. By the merit of these, may we attain the state of omniscience and defeat the evil enemies of defilements. May I liberate all sentient beings from the samsara oceans, turbulent waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. By listening to the excellent and precious Mahayana teachings, whatever boundless merit I've acquired, may all sentient beings become precious and stainless vessels to retain the excellent and precious Mahayana teachings. May the supreme and precious bodhicitta take birth, we have not done so. May it is born, may it increase abundantly without degeneration.